Welcome to a journey far older than memory, far quieter than history, where oceans once spoke in silence and forests stood without names. In this calm documentary, we drift back through time to witness the forgotten ages of Earth, an ancient story told, not with noise, but with whispers, shadows, and the patient breath of worlds before us. If you feel at home in this kind of mystery, where calm meets awe, where the past unfolds gently as you rest, we invite you to be part of our growing circle. Subscribe to Beyond Our Dawn, and let these journeys carry you further into the hidden chapters of our planet's story. The story begins not with people, nor with creatures you might recognize, but with a silence that carried for longer than memory itself. Imagine lying down as night settles, and feeling the weight of the planet beneath you, a steady thrum deep under stone, a heartbeat too slow for human clocks. Long before we counted days, long before any tongue-carved words for old or young, the earth exhaled steam into a sky of molten clouds. The crust was not yet steady. It shifted like a restive sleeper, cracking, sealing, cracking again. Volcanoes did not burst suddenly as they do in modern time. They were the background weather. The air was thick with gases, metallic and sharp, and the heat made every horizon shimmer. It was a world unfurnished, a chamber without furniture. And yet within that chamber the script of life was already rehearsing. Picture vast seas, not of blue but of mineral haze, their surfaces boiling, cooling, then boiling again. Rain fell, not the kind that darkens sidewalks, but rain that hissed on molten rock, rain that steamed away before it gathered. Each drop carried whispers of chemistry, the simplest gestures repeated countless times, hydrogen meeting oxygen, carbon drifting into chains, sulfur slipping between them like a sly accompanist. To think of this in human terms is to imagine a choir tuning in darkness, each voice hesitant, repeating notes until they align. There was no audience, no conductor, only physics arranging itself into the possibility of memory. The patience of such a stage is difficult for us to hold. We count years. This world counted eons. Millions of years slid by with no witness. The earth wrapped in haze, oceans thick with dissolved metals, skies tasting of ash. Yet slowly, beneath waves that rolled without shoreline, molecules found each other. They did not know they were practicing survival. They did not know they were rehearsing what would one day be called inheritance. They simply obeyed the gentle tilt of energy. Bond here, separate there, try again, repeat. And because time was endless, every repetition mattered. Failure was not final. It was simply another line in a script that would be tried again with slight variation. The first sparks of pattern were not alive as we understand the word. They had no will, no hunger, no awareness. They were arrangements of atoms that accidentally found they could encourage more of themselves. Think of a rhythm tapped out on a table when no one is listening. The beat continues not because it must, but because the hand repeats it, and each tap makes the next more likely. So it was with these early patterns. Once started, they tended to repeat. Once repeated, they tended to spread. And so, without intention, the earliest rehearsal of life began. The ocean was a cradle, but not a gentle one. Its floor shifted with volcanic scars. Its waters boiled and cooled unpredictably. Yet in the spaces between fury, there was quiet. Pools formed in sheltered cracks, where heat and mineral mingled in just the right proportion. Within those pools, chains of molecules folded and refolded, some breaking, some persisting. The ones that persisted gained a kind of momentum, like a story retold often enough that it begins to carry its own weight. These were not yet cells, not yet life, but they were different from the lifeless stones around them. They had the ability to echo themselves, and in a universe of silence, an echo is the first sign of voice. Imagine dipping your hand into such a pool, though of course no hand existed. The water would sting with acidity, rough with metallic taste, heavy with dissolved salts. Steam would rise and sting the eyes, though there were no eyes yet. The surface would look still, but beneath it, tiny dramas played out in the folds of molecules twisting into shapes, some of which would hold just long enough to persuade another chain to mimic them. It was not creation in a flash, but accumulation in a murmur, the same gesture practiced endlessly until it felt inevitable. We sometimes imagine life as a spark, a moment of ignition, but it was more like dew forming on cold grass, quiet, unnoticed, and repeated every morning. Over millions of years, these rehearsals accumulated into something durable. Molecules that could not only repeat, but also protect themselves from disruption gained a small edge. Walls formed, fragile films that held the inside distinct from the outside. They were flimsy, as thin as soap bubbles, but enough to cradle the repeating chains and shield them from the chaos beyond. With those walls, the stage gained its first actors, compartments of pattern, the first shy sketches of cells. Still, the planet itself did not care. Storms lashed, volcanoes wept fire, comets scratched the sky. The earth was a patient sculptor, indifferent to whether its chisel struck stone or vapor. Yet within that indifference, life's rehearsal continued. The strange thing is not that it happened, but that it happened so quietly. No trumpet marked the first self-copying film. No chorus announced the first cell-like bubble. It occurred underwater, in darkness, in silence, and it continued because nothing stopped it. That persistence, not intelligence, was the first wisdom. If you were to hold a core of rock drilled from those times, polished to reveal its secrets, you would see thin bands of mineral laid down by oceans that breathed differently from ours. To modern eyes they might seem empty, but within those layers are whispers of chemistry that once moved like thought. A geologist's ledger might note faint traces of carbon isotopes, signs that molecules once preferred one path over another. The entry would be brief, a single line in a catalogue, yet behind that line stretches millions of years of repetition, failure, and quiet triumph. Such is the archive of beginnings, sparse on paper, endless in consequence. The narration of this era must move slowly, for the pace of the planet was glacial compared to our restless time. Each step took millions of years. Each mistake was allowed to persist until it proved unsustainable. This is not a drama of urgency, but of patience. To listen to it properly, one must lower the heart rate, breathe in rhythm with tides that lasted millennia, and accept that the story unfolds without hurry. In that calm, one begins to feel the weight of inevitability, as if the universe itself leans gently toward the idea of life. At night, when you close your eyes, the darkness behind them is not empty. It holds the same hum that filled those early oceans. The pressure in your ears echoes the pressure of ancient water. The taste of salt on your lips recalls the mineral balance that once nurtured the first rehearsals of life. In this way, the planet's earliest memory is still present, carried within our bodies, translated into blood, breath, and bone. We are archives without realizing it, each heartbeat a line copied from that first script. The quiet horror, if one listens closely, lies not in death or loss, but in how inevitable it all seems. Once molecules began to copy, they could not stop. Once walls formed around them, they multiplied. Once the planet cooled enough to hold oceans, those oceans became classrooms where chemistry taught itself to persist. There was no choice, no director, only repetition that refused to fade. And so we inherit not a story of sudden creation, but a story of patience so long that it blurs into fate. Imagine the final moments of this first part of the tale as the camera lingers on a pool of water steaming under a young sky. The surface is calm, but beneath it, molecules are rehearsing the first steps of inheritance. The narration lowers to a whisper, the images soften, and the sound of the planet's hum fills the silence. Nothing dramatic occurs, no creature rises, no light splits the darkness, yet something irreversible has happened. Patterns have begun to repeat in a way that will not end. The story has shifted from geology to biology, from silence to the first stirrings of voice. And though no witness stood at the edge of that pool, though no hand wrote it down, the echo, carried forward, it carries still, in every cell that breathes tonight. What waits just beyond this silence is the crossing itself, the delicate step from pattern to life, from chemistry to continuity. The stage is set, the actors unaware, the audience absent, and yet the curtain is about to rise on a play that will last billions of years. The next act is waiting, and the planet is ready to listen. The stage that followed the first rehearsals was not dramatic. It was not marked by sudden appearances of strange beasts or forests in bloom. Instead, the planet settled into a long, quiet patience where the smallest actors dominated. For billions of years the Earth was a microbial world, a place ruled not by giants but by communities so small they could float unseen in a droplet, and yet their rule was absolute. Everything you know about life today, every tree, every bird, every human breath, descends from those slow and tireless pioneers. Their empire stretched across every pool and every shore, yet it was invisible, whispered rather than spoken, spread through persistence instead of spectacle. The strike is instantaneous. A fireball blooms, brighter than 1,000 suns, scorching everything for miles around. The ground heaves, shock waves ripple outward, forests ignite, dust and molten rock spray into the sky, arcing around the planet. Tidal waves surge outward, drowning coasts. Within hours, the air itself is choked with vaporized stone, soot, and ash. For a brief moment, it is not day or night, but something else, an unnatural twilight that spreads across the globe. The creatures that survive the impact itself face a different enemy, the darkness that follows. For months, sunlight struggles to reach the ground. Temperatures plummet, photosynthesis falters, plants wither. The great herbivores, dependent on constant feeding, starve. Predators, already vulnerable, follow. Entire ecosystems unravel, not through battle but through absence. The sky that once opened each morning with reliable light becomes a veil of grey. Imagine waking into that world cold, dim, silent. The calls of birds muted, the insect hum faint, the forest still. Sleep comes uneasily in such silence, for the comfort of ordinary sound is gone. What remains is waiting, waiting for the dust to settle, waiting for light to return. The fossil record captures this moment with eerie precision. A thin line of clay, rich in iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids, marks the boundary. Below it, fossils of dinosaurs, ammonites, and vast marine reptiles abound. Above it, they are gone. A geologist's ledger might contain a spare notation: Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, 66 million years, just a phrase, but within it lies fire, darkness, and silence. To hold a fragment of that layer in your hand is to hold the memory of a sky falling. The quiet horror of this event is its indifference. The asteroid did not aim, did not choose. It simply fell, and in falling, rewrote life. The giants that had ruled for over 100 million years were undone in an instant, their dominance erased not by weakness but by chance. To reflect on this is to feel the fragility of all reigns, the truth that endurance is never guaranteed, that scale and strength cannot protect against the randomness of the cosmos. Sleep in this recognition comes slowly, as the mind circles the thought that we, too, live under the same sky. Yet even in this darkness, some endured. Small mammals, hidden in burrows, fed on seeds and insects. Crocodiles, living half in water, survived the chill. Birds, descendants of feathered dinosaurs, carried their lineage across the boundary. They endured not because they were strong, but because they were small, adaptable, capable of surviving on little sardine. In the hush that followed the cataclysm, their persistence was the whisper of tomorrow. The stage had been cleared, not emptied. And from the edges, new actors began to step forward. The sensory palette of recovery is stark. The air smells of ash, the ground charred, the seas filled with floating debris. The sounds are muted, the silence broken only by wind-stirring dust, by the occasional cry of a survivor. The forests are gone, replaced by barren ground. Yet in the soil, seeds remain. In burrows, tiny mammals nurse their young. In shallows, fish swim, unknowing of the change above. Slowly, season by season, plants return, first as mosses and ferns, then as shrubs, then as trees. With them come insects, then the creatures that feed on them. The silence lifts, replaced by new rhythms. Imagine standing in such a recovering world. Around you, the air is thinner, cooler. The light is pale, weaker than before. The ground is bare, but shoots of green push upward, fragile yet insistent. A bird darts overhead, its call sharp against the emptiness. A mammal scurries from one shadow to another, its fur bristling. These are not giants, not rulers of the past. They are survivors, and in their smallness lies resilience. Their presence is quiet, but it is enough. The world is beginning again, not with a roar, but with a whisper. The narration of this chapter must be soft, because its truth is heavy. Extinction and survival are intertwined. The end of one reign is the beginning of another. The dinosaurs fell, but birds rose. The giants vanished, but mammals grew in their absence. Each loss opened space. Each silence invited new voices. The asteroid did not end life. It reset it. To fall asleep to this story is to rest in the paradox of destruction as creation, of endings as beginnings. of silence as the womb of sound. As the chapter closes, imagine the camera of thought rising from the scar of the impact. From high above, the crater is vast, a wound still filling with water. Around it, the land is blackened, the seas unsettled, but at the edges, green is returning, wings are flapping, paws are scurrying. The sky is no longer falling, it is opening. The narration lowers to a murmur. What is gone will never return, but what remains will shape the future. The curtain has closed on the age of giants, and in the quiet that follows, new actors step cautiously onto the stage. The silence that followed the falling sky did not linger forever. From the scattered survivors, the world began to repopulate itself, slowly, hesitantly, as if testing whether the stage was truly safe to enter again. Where forests had burned, green shoots rose. Where seas had boiled, life returned in blooms of plankton and schools of fish. And where giants had fallen, smaller bodies filled the void. It was not a triumphant return, but a careful one, a set of experiments written across landscapes, still scarred by ash. Some creatures found their way back into the oceans, relearning shapes long abandoned. Others ventured further across plains, and into forests that no longer echoed with thunderous steps. The world was once more a place of roads that led back to water, and paths that stretched into the long night of new possibilities. Imagine the coastlines of the Paleogene, a few million years after the impact. They are quieter than before, no longer filled with massive reptiles ruling both surf and land. Instead, mammals creep closer to the waves, their bodies reshaping themselves for aquatic life. Some, descendants of hoofed land dwellers, wade into shallows, paddling awkwardly at first, their limbs more suited to earth than surf. Over generations, they grow streamlined, their nostrils sliding higher on their heads, their legs reshaped into flippers. These are the beginnings of whales, creatures that would one day sing across oceans. But for now they are uncertain apprentices, relearning how to belong to the sea. Their story is one of return, a road back to water walked not in haste but in patient adaptation. Further inland, other mammals spread across forests and plains. Some remained small, nocturnal, cautious, but others grew bolder, larger, taking on roles left empty. Hoofed grazers spread in herds, browsing on shrubs, and the early flowering plants that now flourished. Carnivores followed, their teeth sharper, their senses keener. The world was reorganizing itself, not around reptiles but around fur, paws, and teeth. Insects adapted to pollinating flowers that painted the land in color. Birds took to the skies, in greater numbers, their wings filling air once dominated by pterosaurs. The balance was shifting, not toward giants, but toward diversity. Each niche claimed by something new. The soundscape of this world is more familiar than what came before. In the forests, leaves rustle as mammals move through undergrowth. Birds fills the air with calls layered one over another, a chorus of voices experimenting with rhythm. In the seas, the first protowhales call in low frequencies, sounds that carry across distances greater than sight. Along riverbanks, amphibians croak, insects drone, predators prowl silently. To sleep in this world would be to rest in a chorus of sound closer to our own time, less alien, yet still carrying echoes of its ancient past. The lullaby is richer now, woven from fur, feather, and fin. The quiet horror lingers. However, in the recognition of how fragile these beginnings were, the mammals that would one day rule were still vulnerable. Their bones delicate, their populations small. They survived because the giants were gone, but that absence could easily have been filled in other ways. A different adaptation, a different survivor, might have rewritten the script entirely. The record we inherit is not inevitability, but chance. That our lineage rose from shadows was a matter of timing, not destiny. To recognize this is to accept that our story, too, is precarious, balanced on circumstances beyond our control. Picture a shallow bay where early whales practice their new forms. Their bodies are still awkward, not fully fish, not fully land mammal. They paddle with hind limbs that will one day vanish, their tails growing stronger, their lungs learning new rhythms. To watch them is to see transition embodied, a lineage, mid-step between two worlds. On the shore, a field notebook might hold a brief line, Pachyscetus skull, transitional form, amphibious, just a phrase, but within it lies the story of return, of a mammal that ventured into water and never fully came back. The archive is sparse, but the meaning vast. Life not only moves forward, but sometimes circles back, retracing steps to find new paths. Elsewhere, in forests and plains, small primates leap between branches, their hands grasping, their eyes forward. They are not yet human, not yet even close, but their adaptations foreshadow what will come. They move cautiously, sensing predators below, feeding on fruits above. Their presence is quiet, their fossils rare, their story whispered in fragments of bone. Yet they are part of the chorus of renewal, part of the scattering of life into niches abandoned by reptiles. Their future lies not in dominance now, but in waiting, biding time, living in shadows until conditions favor them. To sleep with their story is to rest in patience, to feel the long breath of evolution that holds possibilities beyond imagination. The tactile world of this age is softer. Moss carpets, riverbanks, soil forms thicker layers as roots and fungi work together. The ground feels springier, more forgiving. Trees bear leaves broader and greener than before. Flowers scatter color across meadows. Air feels fresher, filled with oxygen from flourishing plants, carrying scents sweet and sharp. Touching bark reveals ridges shaped by growth rings, time made visible in wood. To rest your palm on such a surface is to feel continuity, the persistence of life through endings into beginnings. The narration of this chapter must be calm, for though extinction had been violent, recovery was slow. Nothing rushed. Each adaptation was tested across generations, each success built carefully on what survived. There is beauty in this patience, in the way life rebuilds itself not with haste but with persistence. The giants did not return, but in their absence, diversity blossomed. To fall asleep to this rhythm is to be comforted by resilience, by the knowledge that endings make room for new beginnings. As the camera of imagination drifts across this reborn world, you see whales sliding into seas, birds filling skies, mammals moving across plains, primates leaping in canopies. The land is no longer silent, the air is no longer empty. The stage is alive again, its cast different but no less vivid. The narration slows, whispering that roads always lead somewhere. Even if they circle back, some paths return to water, others vanish into shadows, still others stretch forward into futures unseen. And in this quiet persistence lies the truth. Life does not end, it changes. The curtain has lifted on another act, and the play continues. In softer tones, the stage was already crowded when we arrived. Long before the first human gaze lifted toward the sky, the world had rehearsed countless acts. Microbes had written the first lines in water dark with minerals. Soft bodies had traced their shadows on stone. Eyes had opened, forests had climbed, wings had spread, and giants had thundered across plains. By the time our kind appeared, the play was ancient. We were not early, not central, not inevitable. We were latecomers, stepping softly into a story older than memory itself. Imagine the earth some 200,000 years ago. The land is alive with forests, grasslands, and rivers winding across continents. Herds of great mammals roam the plains, mammoths with curved tusks, mastodons pushing through woodlands, rhinoceroses with armored hides, giant sloths lumbering slowly across valleys. Saber-toothed cats prowl the edges, their canines glinting in pale light. Wolves hunt in packs, their howls rising under moonlit skies. Birds fill the air, insects the underbrush. Humans are there too, but they are not yet rulers. They move in, small bands, shaping stone into tools, carrying fire in embers, whispering stories in the dark. Their voices are quiet against the chorus of the world. The auditory landscape is richer than ever. Crackling fire, the rustle of grasses stirred by wind, the low rumble of mammoth herds, the sharp cries of predators, the calls of birds overhead. At night, the rhythm changes. Crickets chirp, owls call, footsteps tread softly near riverbanks. Into this symphony, humans add only faint percussion, the tapping of stone, the hush of speech, the lull of song. To sleep in this world would be to rest inside a chorus where we are but one voice among many. Our presence is small, our impact still faint, our future unwritten. Fossils tell us we were not alone. Other humans shared the earth. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis on distant islands, and others, whose names we may never know. For a time, the world was filled with many kinds of us, each shaping tools, each lighting fires, each living lives that mattered. We overlapped, we mingled, we interbred. Our lineage is not pure, but braided, a tapestry woven from threads that touched and frayed and vanished. The quiet horror is that they are gone, every one but us. Their absence is our inheritance. Their stories ended not because they were weak, but because history is merciless in its selections. To think of them is to feel the shadows of siblings lost, entire voices erased, leaving only echoes in our blood. The tactile world of early humans was intimate. Rough stone pressed against skin as it was chipped into blades, fire-warmed palms, and faces, its smoke-stinging eyes. Animal hides wrapped bodies, in heat against cold nights. Soil and dust clung to feet, rivers cooled hands, branches bent beneath gathering fingers. Every sensation was direct, unfiltered by walls or glass or machines. To live then was to live within touch of the earth itself. Sleep came on beds of grass or hides, under stars unbroken by light, the night vast and close at once. Our story since then has been one of layers. We learned to plant, to build, to write. Cities rose, roads stretched, ships sailed, machines hummed, lights burned. Each step carried us further from the forests and plains where we began. Yet the earth has always been beneath us, patient and indifferent. We tell ourselves that we are exceptional, that our intelligence sets us apart, that our tools make us masters, yet every breath still carries oxygen, exhaled by ancient forests. Every step still presses on soil shaped by microbes. Every heartbeat still follows rhythms written long before us. We are not separate. We are continuations. The horror, gentle but persistent, is in remembering that nothing lasts. The Ediacaran shapes vanished without descendants. The forests of the Carboniferous collapsed into coal. The dinosaurs ruled for 100 million years and were erased in a single instant. What guarantee do we have that we will endure? We build monuments, but stony roads. We record names, but languages fade. We light cities, but power fails. To reflect on this is not despair but perspective. We are part of a cycle older than memory. Our permanence is an illusion, our transience the truth we share with all who came before. And yet, there is tenderness in our presence here. We are storytellers. No stromatolite recorded its own patience, no trilobite its own path, no dinosaur its own fall. Only we gather the threads, retell them, imagine them, and lay them out across nights like this. In our stories, the silence speaks again, the forests grow again, the eyes open again. Memory is not enough to halt extinction, but it is enough to honor it. That is our place in this long play. Not rulers, not saviors, but narrators who walk late onto the stage, whispering what we have seen and what we remember. The soundscape of now is different. Engines hum, cities roar, voices echo through machines. Yet beneath it, the older sounds remain. Waves still lap against shores, winds still sigh through branches, insects still sing at night. Close your eyes, and you will hear them. Sleep too, their rhythm, and you sleep to the same lullabies that soothed creatures long vanished. Our noise may fade, but their music remains. Imagine, as this story draws to a close, standing on a quiet hill. The sky above you is filled with stars, as it has always been. The wind brushes your skin, carrying scents of grass and soil. You breathe deeply, oxygen filling your lungs, an inheritance billions of years old. Beneath your feet, the ground holds fossils of creatures who never knew you would come. Around you the earth rests, neither welcoming nor rejecting, simply continuing. You are here, late but present, another verse in an ancient song. The narration softens, a whisper to carry into sleep. We did not begin the story, and we will not end it. We are in it, one chapter among many, one voice in a chorus that stretches backward into oceans without names, and forward into futures we cannot imagine. To live is to join that chorus, to rest is to let it carry you, and perhaps, in the quiet of night, that is enough. Picture a shoreline with no grass, no insects, no footprints. The air is heavy, the water warm, the rocks dark and bare. In the shallows, layered mats of microbes stack one upon another, weaving films so thin they would tear at a touch, yet together, they persist like cloth woven over centuries. These mats do not look alive by our standards. They resemble weathered carpet, slick to the touch, sometimes forming domes that break the surface like rounded stones. But if you were to kneel and listen, if you could somehow slow your hearing to the pace of eons, you would notice a rhythm inside them, a slow exchange of gases, a communal breath, spread across countless cells, each cell tiny, each action minute, yet together producing something that would one day remake the planet. This was not a kingdom of competition, not yet. Predators had not arrived, nor prey. The ocean was a crowded dormitory, where repetition was enough. Microbes clung to rocks, drifted with currents, clustered around mineral vents. They consumed what chemistry offered: iron, sulfur, hydrogen, carbon compounds carried by tides. No mouth was needed, no eye, no nerve. They absorbed, transformed, and multiplied, their cycles echoing across generations beyond counting. To call them simple is misleading. They were architects of landscapes, invisible to the eye but immense in impact. They built stromatolite-layered stone towers created by trapping sediment in sticky microbial films. Slowly, centimeter by centimeter, they grew upward, monuments of patience that can still be seen in ancient rocks today. To walk among their fossilized remains is to walk through cathedrals built by hands too small to see. Imagine the soundscape of such a world. Not birdsong, not wind in leaves, but the soft lick of waves against stone, the occasional hiss of gases escaping from vents, and beneath it all, a constant fizz at microscopic scale, bubbles of oxygen slipping upward, carbon dioxide dissolving downward. This was the soundtrack of patience, a music so low and steady that it became the background to everything else. To fall asleep to it would be to sink into a rhythm older than dreams, a lullaby hummed by bacteria that never knew they were singing. The horror here, if one wishes to find it, lies in the realization of scale. For billions of years, nothing more complex than a cell existed. Entire epochs passed with no creature larger than dust. From our perspective, this feels like emptiness, a wasted stage, a planet waiting for the play to begin. But from the microbes' perspective, if such a thing can be imagined, the stage was already complete. The oceans belonged to them, the chemistry was theirs, and the rhythms they set down became the scaffolding for all who followed. To dismiss them as simple is to mistake quiet for absence. Quiet can be stronger than thunder when stretched across enough time. A weathered slab in a museum may bear witness to this patience. Its surface, polished by human hands, reveals faint ripples, delicate textures pressed into stone 3 billion years ago by microbial mats. The ledger beside it might contain a single line: stromatolite, Western Australia, Archeon, Ian. To most visitors, it is an odd rock. To those who linger, it is an archive of breath, a record of communities layering themselves upward for thousands of years until the weight of sediment preserved their pattern. That one line in the ledger holds a library of lives beyond counting, each cell born and gone, yet all together forming something enduring. Microbes did not need urgency. Their advantage was time. They multiplied slowly but endlessly, filling every crevice where moisture lingered. Some learned to use sunlight, capturing energy with pigments that turned the ocean a shade greener. Others thrived in darkness, feeding on chemicals near volcanic vents, indifferent to the absence of day. Some formed partnerships, clusters where one type's waste became another's food. A cycle of generosity that looked almost like design but was simply persistence refined. This web of exchanges stabilized the planet in ways no single creature ever could. While the crust shifted and continents began their long drift, the microbes endured, adapting to each tremor, each shift in sea level, each tilt of climate. Think of them as the custodians of repetition. Every sunrise saw them dividing. Every tide left behind films of their presence. Every rainfall rinsed minerals into pools where they waited. There was no season they could not outlast, no silence they could not fill. To sleep beside them would be to rest within constancy itself. They did not rise or fall, they simply remained. And in remaining, they slowly altered the chemistry of the world. At first, their changes were subtle. Traces of oxygen built up in water, reacting with dissolved iron to form layers of rust that sank to the seafloor. Slowly, the oceans turned from green to blue as iron was consumed and oxygen lingered. The skies, once heavy with haze, began to clear. This was not a sudden cleansing but a drawn-out exhalation lasting millions of years. Microbes breathed without intent, yet their breath redefined the air. The ground beneath their films recorded each shift, sediment banded with evidence of slow, relentless transformation. To us it looks like art, stripes of red and grey, stone painted by unseen artists. To them it was simply living, another day, another division. another layer. The patient rule of microbes teaches a lesson that unsettles human pride. Complexity is not inevitable. Intelligence is not required. For most of Earth's history, life was small, communal, and sufficient. Nothing urged it forward. Nothing demanded invention. The pressure we associate with evolution, predation, competition, the need to adapt quickly, had not yet arrived. In their absence, stability reigned. Microbes could afford to linger, to perfect their chemistry, to spread without hurry. They were content, if the word can be borrowed, to be the planet's first and longest rulers. At times storms scoured coastlines, volcanic winters chilled the air, asteroids struck and sent plumes into the sky. Yet microbes endured. They did not march, they did not flee. They simply persisted in pools and cracks, in vents and sediments. Each catastrophe that might have ended a larger creature passed over them like a breeze. The resilience of smallness proved more durable than the might of size. In this lies a quiet horror too, that our drama, our striving, our urgency might be less secure than the patience of organisms that never sleep, never hurry, and never tire of repetition. To walk now through deserts where ancient seas once spread, is to find their memorials. Layered rocks tilt toward the sun, their surfaces etched with faint textures that hint at films of cells long gone. They appear lifeless, but within those patterns is a story of endless persistence. Geologists trace them, label them, measure isotopes that confirm their age. Each measurement is a whisper heard across billions of years. The rock does not boast. It simply holds what was placed there grain by microbes, who knew nothing of future witnesses. The narration of this world must be slow. Words must fall like soft rain, each drop echoing the one before. To describe microbes is to describe patience itself. There are no heroes, no villains, only cycles. Birth and death blur into one, generation after generation, indistinguishable. And yet from that monotony arose the conditions that would allow every later flourish of life. The stage was theirs, and they prepared it unknowingly for others. In this lies both awe and unease. Awe that such smallness could alter a planet. Unease that our own greatness rests upon foundations so quiet we rarely notice them. As the camera of imagination drifts across the shallow seas of that time, the light is dim, filtered through haze. The water holds mats that ripple slightly with current. Bubbles slip upward, tiny and constant. The narrator's voice remains calm, almost drowsy, guiding the listener into rhythm with this ancient patience. A faint ledger entry might appear on screen stromatolite, Archean Ian and fade again. Nothing more is needed. The image lingers. The sound of water fills the silence, and the viewer begins to feel the weight of time itself. Not in years but in repetition. When you lie in darkness tonight, the breath you take carries oxygen once released by these microbes. Your blood carries iron that once rusted in their oceans. The patience of their world still lives inside you, an inheritance written not in words but in chemistry. To fall asleep to this thought is to remember that you are part of a story that began billions of years before your name. You are not the first to breathe, only the latest echo of a practice refined across unimaginable spans of time. And as the narration slows to a close, the hook is gentle, almost imperceptible. Oxygen, once a trace in the water, is building. The microbes, unaware, continue their cycles. But something profound is gathering strength. The air is changing, and with it the future. A new chapter is waiting, carried on the smallest breath, preparing to alter the course of life forever. The change came not as thunder, but as a whisper, stretched so thin across time that no single generation of cells could sense it. Oxygen did not arrive as a gift, and it was not welcomed. It crept quietly, molecule by molecule, released by the smallest of creatures as waste, seeping into waters that had never known such a thing. For millions of years, it went unnoticed, dissolved into iron-rich seas, swallowed by stone, erased, as quickly as it was made. But repetition is patient. Every sunrise saw the same modest exhalations, and every tide carried them a little farther. What began as an impurity became an atmosphere. What began as a trace became a destiny. Imagine the oceans then, green and heavy, their surfaces calm but their depths clouded with minerals. Beneath them, mats of cyanobacteria absorbed sunlight, splitting water, releasing oxygen without intent. To the cells themselves, this was no more dramatic than eating, no more sacred than survival. But to the planet, the consequence was monumental. Oxygen is a restless element. It bonds eagerly, it corrodes, it burns. As it trickled into seawater, it found iron waiting, billions of tons dissolved and drifting. The reaction was immediate. Though stretched across eons, iron turned to rust, falling like red snow, layering the seafloor in stripes that endure today. These bands of iron are our testimony, rocks painted in alternating shades of grey and crimson, each stripe a breath. Taken billions of years ago to hold a fragment of that banded ironstone is to cradle an ancient record of respiration. Its layers are thin, sometimes only millimeters, but they repeat 4 meters, 4 kilometers, across continents. The ledger of the planet is written in rust. Geologists read it like scripture, tracing the slow rhythm of oxygen's rise. They log each stratum, each isotope ratio, each subtle shift in composition. But behind those numbers lies a simple truth. The smallest cells changed the color of the world. They did not mean to, they could not have known, but their persistence was enough. Waste became atmosphere, and atmosphere became future. At first, the oceans absorbed it all. Oxygen bound to iron, to sulfur, to methane, scouring the chemistry of the seas. For millions of years, it never lingered in the air. It was swallowed by stone and water as soon as it appeared. But eventually the sinks filled, the reactions slowed, and oxygen began to slip free. It entered the sky, tentative, faint, soon scattered by volcanic gases, but persistent. Each sunrise renewed it. Each sunset left a trace more than the night before. Slowly, invisibly, the sky changed. The haze thinned. The air shifted. What had once been poison was becoming potential. The microbes themselves suffered for their gift. Oxygen, though vital to us, was toxic to many of them. It destroyed the delicate chemistry on which they depended. To survive, some retreated into the deep, into sediments, into pockets where oxygen could not reach. They became exiles in their own world, clinging to anaerobic habits that had served them for eons. Others adapted, cautiously at first, developing enzymes to neutralize the poison, then to use it. Those that succeeded gained a new kind of energy, richer, more abundant. By burning food with oxygen, they could release far more power than before. It was as if the planet had handed them a new language, and those who learned to speak it became stronger. The stage was shifting from survival to innovation. The soundscape of this slow revolution was not dramatic. No thunder, no screams, only the hiss of gases escaping vents, the crackle of chemical reactions in silence, the fizz of bubbles rising unseen. To sleep beside it would have been to rest within a lullaby of chemistry, a murmur that never ceased. The horror, if one wishes to call it that, is in the inevitability. Oxygen could not be undone. Once released, it would always seek partners, always bond, always transform. The planet had entered a new regime, one that would demand adaptation or extinction. Entire lineages of microbes vanished, not with a bang but with a whimper, erased. By air they themselves had created. To imagine the skies clearing is to imagine a planet learning to breathe. Before oxygen, the world was cloaked in haze, skies orange with methane, seas green with dissolved metals. As oxygen accumulated, the haze thinned, the skies turned blue, the oceans shifted toward transparency. Sunlight reached deeper into the water, fueling more photosynthesis, creating a feedback that quickened the process. Slowly, the world grew brighter, not suddenly, not in a single generation, but across millions of years. Each dawn carrying a fraction more light, each dusk leaving a trace more oxygen. The very palette of Earth changed, painted not by intention but by persistence. One might picture an ancient core sample, drilled from deep stone, its surface polished to reveal alternating bands of color. The card attached might read, banded, iron formation, 2.5 billion years, a single line, but within it lies the story of oceans transformed, of skies rewritten, of life teaching itself to change the planet. The record is quiet, unadorned, and yet it holds the weight of inevitability. To glance at it is to glimpse the patience of repetition made permanent. Oxygen brought possibility, but also tension. With greater energy, cells could grow larger, cooperate, attempt new forms. But with greater energy also came greater risk. Fire became possible. Rust became universal. The chemistry of the planet accelerated. Evolution itself found a new tempo, though it would take eons more for that tempo to become music we would recognize. Still, the seed was planted. Complexity, was now affordable. Specialization was now sustainable. The long patience of microbes had prepared the ground, and the ground was ready to host something more. If you close your eyes now and breathe deeply, the oxygen filling your lungs is there. Legacy. Each molecule has a lineage, a history written in photosynthesis billions of years old. The air is not a neutral medium. It is a monument to persistence. You carry it with you. You release it with each exhale. You inherit it with every heartbeat. The quiet horror is that what we take for granted, what we cannot live without, was once a poison that scoured the planet clean. Survival depends not on what we find pleasant, but on what we can adapt to. The microbes that endured did not choose oxygen. They survived it, and in surviving, they reshaped the future. Imagine the oceans at the height of this transition. Surface, waters froth with bubbles of oxygen, the sun glints off waves that are clearer than before, and the seafloor glows faintly red with layers of rusted sediment. Above, the sky is paler, hinting at the blue we know. The world is the same size, spins the same speed, but feels entirely different. A chemical switch has been flipped, not with intention, not with ceremony, but with repetition. And from this quiet alteration, the path toward complex life begins. This act of the story carries no characters we can name, no creatures we would recognize. It is a chapter written in chemistry and stone, a slow burn that lasted for millions upon millions of years, and yet, without it, nothing that followed could exist. No plants, no animals, no humans. Oxygen was both the destroyer and the creator, the great poison that became the great catalyst. To fall asleep with this thought is to rest within paradox, that what kills also enables, that what suffocates also empowers, that the line between bane and blessing is thinner than a breath. As the narration drifts toward its close, the camera of imagination might settle on a shoreline of that ancient time. Waves lap against rust-colored stones, mats of microbes shimmer faintly in sunlight, exhaling quietly, unaware of their consequence. Above them, the sky clears a fraction more, the haze thinning imperceptibly. Nothing announces the change, nothing celebrates it, yet everything is different. The next stage is waiting, carried in the new air. The world has learned to burn, and, with that fire, it will imagine new forms. The curtain is about to rise on complexity, and the stage is set. The world that followed the long breath of oxygen was neither loud nor triumphant. It was tentative, fragile, and filled with bodies so soft that almost nothing of them would remain. To look backward now is to peer into shadows cast on stone, faint impressions pressed into ancient seabeds, like whispers of lives that never quite resolved into permanence. These are the Ediacaran organisms, creatures that lived in silence, moved in silence, and left behind silence except for the delicate outlines that we stumble upon today. Their story is one of experiments conducted in darkness, rehearsals that seemed promising and then disappeared, an age of forms that stretched the definition of what it meant to be alive. Picture a seafloor without predators, without competition, without urgency. Sunlight filters faintly through shallow waters, softened by planktonic haze. The bottom is a quilt of microbial mats, slick surfaces that serve as both foundation and food source. Upon these mats lie shapes that appear almost plant-like, that fan upward, discs that rest like coins pressed into the sediment, ridged ovals that resemble pillows abandoned on the floor of a quiet room. They do not walk, they do not chase, they do not flee. Instead they anchor, absorb, and exist. Their stillness is not laziness but strategy, a way of being tuned to a world that has not yet invented teeth or claws. The strangeness of these bodies defies our categories. Some are symmetrical in ways we do not recognize, fivefold, fractal, or entirely asymmetrical. Some have no mouth, no gut, no obvious means of digestion. Others seem to breathe directly through their surfaces, taking nutrients from the mats they rest upon or from the water that flows around them. They are soft, so soft that their tissues rarely fossilize, leaving behind only imprints, shallow depressions preserved when sand buried them quickly enough to protect their outlines. These impressions are delicate, often mistaken for ripples or wrinkles in stone. Yet when studied carefully, they reveal organized form creatures that once pulsed gently on the sea floor and then vanished as though they had never been. To walk through a gallery that displays these fossils is to enter a room of ghosts. The slabs are large, flat, gray, their surfaces marked by faint leaf-like shapes, discs, and ridges. A small museum card might read, Ediacaran impression, 560 million years. Just a line, a date, a place. But behind that line is an entire world of possibilities. A stage where life experimented with designs that would never be repeated. The horror here is not violent, it is quiet. The horror of erasure. Entire lineages rose, spread, thrived, and then ended, leaving almost nothing but faint traces for us to puzzle over. They remind us that permanence is not promised, that even life itself can drift into silence without explanation. The seafloor of this time would have seemed calm, but it was alive with subtle textures. Fronds swayed slightly with currents, discs inflated and deflated like cushions. Ridged organisms, folded and unfolded. Their movements were not fast enough to notice in a glance, but if one could watch across days, one would see shifting, adjusting, the slow dance of creatures that lived in partnership with the mats beneath them. There was no hunting, no fleeing. Energy was absorbed quietly, life sustained by chemical trickles rather than dramatic pursuit. It was a world of cooperation with the substrate, not of conflict with neighbors. The auditory landscape was hushed. The only sounds were currents slipping over bodies, sediment falling grain by grain, bubbles rising from microbial activity below. The organisms themselves made no noise, no stirring, no cause. To sleep in that world would be to float in a cradle of silence, disturbed only by the slow pulse of water. The dread, if any, comes from the absence of threat, from the recognition that change might not come at all. Life could have remained this way, soft, still, unambitious forever. That it did not is both fortune and unease. Scientists puzzled over these forms, debating where they belong on the tree of life. Some suggest they were ancestors of animals, early attempts at body plans that would later flourish. Others argue they were separate experiments, unique lineages that ended without descendants. Their ambiguity is unsettling. We prefer clear beginnings, neat stories, a straight line from then to now. But the Ediacaran world refuses that clarity. It offers us creatures that look familiar but are not, bodies that seem purposeful but vanish without explanation. They stand as a reminder that life is not a ladder but a labyrinth, filled with corridors that lead nowhere, rooms that collapse, hallways that echo with footsteps that never return. Imagine placing your hand on a slab that holds such an impression. The stone is cool, the ridges shallow, the pattern faint. You feel almost nothing, yet your mind knows that beneath your palm once lay a body soft as jelly, anchored to the seabed, pulsing gently as currents washed over it. It lived for years, perhaps decades, repeating its quiet cycle, then collapsed, buried in sediment, leaving only this faint memory. A ledger in a research archive might record its dimensions, its age, its classification uncertain. But what it cannot capture is the sense of presence that lingers, the ghost of a creature that existed without mouth, without eye, without voice. The Ediacaran period lasted tens of millions of years, long enough for these organisms to spread across seas worldwide. Yet, when the Cambrian dawn arrived, they were gone. Some may have been outcompeted by more active animals that evolved new ways of feeding, moving, and defending. Others may have vanished because the environment changed, oxygen levels rising, or nutrients shifting. Whatever the cause, their soft bodies left little record of their departure. They are remembered not by skeletons or shells but by absence, by the emptiness they left behind. In this way, they are more haunting than the dinosaurs, more ghostly than any creature with bones. Their vanishing feels like a sigh carried away by tide. To tell their story in a sleep-friendly tone is to lean into the slowness. Each sentence stretches like a frond in current. Each image lingers like an imprint in stone. The lesson is not urgency but fragility. Life can try forms that do not endure, and that is part of its nature. The world does not guarantee success. It only offers time, and in that time, experiments unfold, some leading forward, others fading away. The Ediacaran world is a dream within the dream of life, a chapter written in soft ink that smudged before it could be bound. At night, when you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself lying on that seabed. Around you are shapes that breathe without mouths, fronds that sway without leaves, discs that rest without muscles. You hear only water moving, only sediment settling, only the faint rustle of microbial mats shifting beneath them. The creatures beside you do not notice your presence. They have no eyes to see, no nerves to feel. They simply exist, repeating their quiet cycles as they have for eons. And as you close your eyes, you feel the softness of their world, the fragility of forms that came and went without ever knowing they were temporary. The subtle hook at the close of this chapter is not loud. It is a murmur that something is about to change. For millions of years, life was soft, still, experimental, but currents are shifting. Oxygen has primed the world for movement. Energy is available in abundance. Somewhere in the shadows, cells are learning to coordinate, to contract, to choose direction. The seabed of soft bodies will soon face neighbors who move with purpose. And once motion enters the stage, silence will never be the same. That the silence did not last. It stretched across millions of years, yes, but silence in nature is never permanent. Out of the softness of the Ediacaran seas came a stirring, not abrupt, not violent, but steady as breath. Movement sharpened, bodies became more complex, and something truly new arrived, the ability to sense the world before it touched you. This was the dawn of the Cambrian, the time when life began to notice itself, when light became information, and when survival gained a dimension it had never known before. It was the quiet awakening of senses, and with them, the beginning of everything we would come to call animal. Imagine drifting in shallow seas 500 million years ago. The bottom is still lined with microbial mats and strange frond-like bodies, but among them are new figures, small, armored, cautious. They scuttle, they burrow, they swim with intent. The water, once filled with creatures that merely absorbed and endured, is now filled with beings that probe, search, and react. The great shift is not just movement but awareness. Some bodies detect pressure, some detect chemicals, some even respond to the faint patterns of light filtering down from above. The world is no longer simply a stage, it is a conversation, and once conversation begins, it never stops. The first eyes were not eyes as we know them. They were patches of pigment, sensitive to light, simple clusters of cells that could distinguish brightness from shadow. Yet even that was revolutionary. To tell light from dark is to tell danger from safety, to know where to move and where to hide. With that ability, the ocean grew tense. A frond that had swayed unbothered for millions of years was now noticed, watched, perhaps grazed. A creature that had rested quietly on sediment was now seen, targeted, pursued. The water gained a new dimension, distance. For the first time, organisms could react to what was not yet touching them. The space between became meaningful. The horror here is subtle but deep. Once vision appeared, hiding became necessary. Once predation began, defenses followed. Shells hardened, spines rose, bodies flattened to escape notice. The arms race had begun, not in fire and noise but in soft pulses, gradual improvements, slight advantages that meant survival for one and silence for another. Every adaptation bred counter-adaptations. Eyes improved, camouflage became more elaborate, muscles grew stronger, armor thickened. The ocean, once a cradle of stillness, became a place of tension where every body was both observer and observed. To fall asleep with this thought is to rest in a world where awareness itself is unsettling, where to see is also to be seen. And yet, the tone remains gentle. Imagine a trilobite crawling across the sea floor, its many legs moving in slow rhythm, its compound eyes catching glints of light. It grazes on microbial mats, unaware of its role as an ancestor to countless lineages. Above it, a worm-like predator senses its movement, adjusting its body with subtle ripples, guided by chemical gradients and the faint suggestion of shadow. The chase is not frantic, it is measured, almost meditative, each creature fulfilling a role scripted by millions of years of repetition. The outcome matters only in the long sweep of evolution, not in the moment. There is no malice, only persistence. The soundscape of this time is richer than before. Sediment is disturbed by burrowing bodies. Water swishes as fins push against it. The faint scrape of shell against rock echoes across the seabed. Bubbles rise where microbial mats are grazed. None of these sounds are loud, but together they form a chorus of life more active than anything the planet had known. To listen is to feel the hum of awareness itself, as if the sea is whispering in a new language. Sleep comes easily in such a world, lulled by the rhythm of small bodies moving with intention. A fleeting archival image might appear in the mind, a diagram from a paleontology notebook, lines sketching the outline of an ancient arthropod. Notes scrawled in the margin about eye facets, segmentation, limb count. The page looks clinical, but behind it lies the wonder of vision's first dawn. That page is only a shadow of the moment when light became guidance, when survival became strategy. To imagine that page in a ledger is to imagine the world first, realizing it could see. The Cambrian explosion, as it is often called, was not a single burst but a widening of possibility. Dozens of body plans emerged, creatures with shells, with plates, with spines, with tentacles. Some swam, some crawled, some floated. Most were small, measured in centimeters, but their variety was astonishing. In the span of geological moments still, millions of years but quick by Earth's measure, life diversified in ways never seen before. The ocean became a gallery of experiments, each design a trial of what might endure. Some succeeded, others faded, but altogether they created a richness that reshaped the planet, and through it all, senses sharpened. Vision grew more precise, from light-sensitive patches to clusters of lenses, to compound eyes with hundreds of facets. Touch became finer, chemical detection more nuanced, orientation in water more accurate. Nervous systems thickened, coordinating movement with perception. Animals no longer simply moved, they decided where and when to move. Agency, in its simplest form, had arrived. That agency carried both promise and dread. With it came the possibility of choice, but also the inevitability of conflict. To sense the world is to enter a game that never ends. The beauty of this age lies not in the monsters it produced, but in the subtlety of its beginnings. Before jaws, before claws, before speed, there was sight. Before violence, there was awareness. The first eyes did not start wars, they simply opened, but by opening, they invited everything that followed. To see a predator is to invent prey. To see shelter is to create the idea of pursuit. Vision did not just expand survival, it rewrote it, and though the Cambrian seas were filled with creatures strange to us, their legacy is written in every eye that blinks tonight. Consider the tactile experience of such a world. The seafloor is textured with burrows and tracks, lines pressed into sediment by countless feet and fins. Each mark is a note in the score of early awareness. Fossils of these traces remain, preserved as stone etchings, the earliest record of behavior. They are simple grooves, spirals, meanders, yet they reveal movement with purpose. A worm twists toward food, an arthropod follows a path, a small swimmer circles a mat. These are not random scratches. They are the handwriting of intention, the first signatures of choice etched into the earth. The quiet horror is to realize that with awareness came vulnerability. A creature that sees danger must live with fear. A creature that hears pursuit must know the possibility of pain. Before senses, life was simple endurance. After senses, life was tension. That tension has never left us. Even now, in the dark, our ears listen for sounds. Our eyes adjust to shadows. Our nerves anticipate threat. These instincts are not ours alone. They are inheritances from the Cambrian, gifts from ancestors who first learned to notice. To drift into sleep while thinking of this is to feel your own body echoing their discoveries. Eyelids closing over eyes that once were pigment patches. Skin tingling with nerves that once were faint sensors in water. You are a collection of ancient awakenings, gathered across eons, still listening in the dark. The Cambrian did not end the story. It opened it. The senses would sharpen further. Bodies would become more elaborate. Strategies more complex. But the essential shift had occurred. Life was no longer passive. It was interactive, responsive, aware. The seas had become theaters of perception, and every organism was both actor and audience. The curtain had risen on a play that would never end, one where every scene demanded adaptation, where every act invited transformation. As this chapter closes, imagine the camera, thought panning slowly across the Cambrian Sea. Fronds still sway, but now small bodies move among them. Eyes glinting, antennae feeling, fins propelling. The light is brighter, the water clearer, the interactions more charged. The narration softens, reminding us that this is not a story of monsters but of beginnings, of senses opening like doors in the dark. And as the image fades, a gentle hook lingers. What is noticed must be answered. What is sensed must be survived, and the path from awareness to complexity has only just begun. The ocean had been the only home for nearly all of Earth's history. a vast and weightless cradle that allowed life to drift and float and hide in currents. But in time, the margins of that cradle began to beckon, not suddenly, not with triumphant leaps, but with tentative gestures, cautious tests at the edges, where water met rock. This was the beginning of life's slow migration toward land, a movement that would never fully abandon the sea, but would forever alter the face of the planet. The first steps toward shore were not heroic. They were fragile, desperate, and yet they opened the possibility of an entirely new world. Imagine a coastline 500 million years ago. There are no forests, no grass, no insects humming. The air is heavy and damp, unbreathable for any animal of that time. The land itself is robo-rock, shifting sand, streaks of mineral crust darkened by spray. Yet here and there, in cracks, where moisture lingers, in pools that refill with every tide, life is making a tentative claim. Thin films of algae coat whetstones, spreading like a green haze. Microbial mats, carried from the sea, clang to surfaces that remain damp long enough. At the margins of these mats rise the earliest plant-like pioneers, simple stalks and filaments, ancestors of moss that stretch only a few inches but are revolutionary all the same. For the first time, the Earth's surface is not entirely barren, it holds a breath of green. The first animals to test these margins were arthropods, creatures whose bodies were armored in exoskeletons that helped keep them from drying too quickly. Their jointed legs allowed them to push against uneven ground, to scuttle across damp sand, to retreat when the air grew too harsh. They were not masters of the land, but visitors, venturing only where moisture was abundant, mudflats, tidal pools, mossy edges. Their presence was brief, yet it marked a threshold. The ocean was no longer the only stage. New niches were opening, fragile but waiting. The tactile sensation of such a world is striking. Step into it in your imagination. Your feet would find slippery stone, your skin would prickle from the salt spray, and the air would taste metallic, thin in oxygen, harsh to lungs unprepared. The sun beats down on rock without shade, the ground, hot underfoot, the waterline a refuge. Life clings here in patches, scattered and humble, yet each patch is a seed for what will come. The sensory palette is simple waves slapping stone, wind brushing over bare surfaces, the soft rasp of an arthropod's legs scratching across grit. To fall asleep with these sounds is to rest in the earliest lullaby of land, a rhythm slow and sparse. The fear woven into this story is not one of predators but of exposure. In the sea, water cushioned, supported, and carried nutrients. On land, everything was risk. Without waterproof skin, creatures dried quickly. Without efficient lungs, they suffocated. Without soil, plants had little to anchor to. To exist at the edge was to gamble with desiccation, to survive only in the most humid pockets. Entire lineages may have tried and failed, leaving no trace except the knowledge that some did persist. To us, this fragility is haunting. The Earth offered land as a new stage, but the cost of entering it was high, and only the most stubborn experiments endured. One can imagine a field notebook, its page marked with a brief entry, earliest spores, found in ancient shale, approximately 470 million years, just a line. But that line captures the moment when plants began to send their inheritance onto land. Tiny packets of potential carried by wind or water, scattering across barren rock. Some of these spores found moist niches and grew, sending filaments downward, stretching upward toward light. From these fragile beginnings, entire forests would eventually rise. But at the time, they were little more than specks clinging to chance. The archival note is spare, yet it contains the seed of the world we know. The atmosphere itself was changing, thanks to these pioneers. Plants and algae captured carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, gradually reshaping air that was once hostile into something breathable. The transformation was not immediate. For millions of years, land remained an alien realm, visited but not yet inhabited. Yet each patch of moss, each spore carried on the wind, each arthropod scuttling across damp mud, pushed the boundary a little further. What was once unthinkable life beyond the ocean was becoming not only possible but inevitable. The narration of this age must remain hushed, because its pace was glacial. Nothing rushed ashore. No grand parade announced the conquest of land. Instead, the story unfolded in increments invisible to human reckoning. Each tide left behind a trace of organisms that endured just a little longer. Each rainfall carved niches where spores could take hold. Each shift in climate offered new opportunities for colonization. Across millions of years, the shoreline blurred into a gradient where sea and land mingled, and in that gradient, life found its foothold. Imagine lying down on a rocky coast of that time. Around you, thin mats of algae glisten in the damp. A few inches away, a tiny stalk rises, trembling in the breeze, its cells straining against gravity. Small arthropods scuttle, their shells glinting in light, leaving faint tracks that will vanish with the next tide. The world is quiet. No birds call, no leaves rustle, no animals breathe nearby. The only sounds are wind, water, and the faint scratching of legs. You close your eyes and hear the future stirring, not loudly, but insistently. The land is not empty anymore. It has begun to host experiments in staying. The quiet horror here is existential. We think of land as inevitable for life, but it was not. The risks were immense, the failures countless. Entire lineages likely vanished, their attempts erased by dryness, by exposure, by the mercilessness of sun and wind. The success of those who managed to persist was fragile, contingent on conditions aligning just enough. To recognize this is to recognize the precariousness of our own existence. The ground we take for granted as our home was once alien, unwelcoming, and nearly impossible to claim. We live on the outcome of improbable victories, and yet, those victories compounded. Plants grew larger, arthropods more numerous, soils began to form as microbial films broke down rock. Each success reinforced the next, layering stability where none had existed. The coastline transformed slowly from barren rock to patches of green, from patches to mats, from mats to communities. The rhythm of land was being written, one hesitant step at a time. Sleep comes easily when imagining this, because its pace is so slow, its progress so patient. There is no rush, only persistence stretched across millennia. The chapter closes with a gentle hook, not a jolt. Imagine the camera of thought panning back from the shoreline, showing algae shimmering moss, anchoring arthropods crawling. The tide rises, covers them, recedes, leaves them again. Day by day, century by century, they remain. Above them, the air thickens with a little more oxygen, the sky brightens, the stage broadens. Land is no longer barren. It has been touched, and that touch will deepen. The next act will not be quiet mats, but forests reaching upward, trunks rewriting the horizon. The shore has been crossed, and the world will never be the same. The shoreline experiments did not stop at mosses and mats. In time, persistence took root, literally, and what had once been bare stone and damp crust began to change into something taller, denser, and stranger. Forests arrived, but not the forests you know. These were ancient and nameless, their trunks rising without leaves, their crowns reaching into a sky that had never before been divided by green. To step into one of these primeval groves would be to enter a cathedral built not for human eyes, but for air itself. They stood in silence, columns of living tissue, drawing carbon from the atmosphere and breathing oxygen into the world, reshaping climate with every slow exhalation. They were not yet lush with birdsong or alive with mammals, but they were alive with spores, roots, and shadows that stretched across an entirely new landscape. Imagine walking into one of these Carboniferous forests 300 million years ago. The ground is damp, soft, and layered with decaying matter that smells sweet and sharp at once. There are no flowers, for flowers have not yet evolved, and no grass, for grass will come much later. Instead, there are towering lycopsids plants that look like giant club mosses stretching upwards like narrow towers, their bark patterned with diamond scars left by fallen leaves. Some grow over 100 feet tall, their hollow cores filled with soft tissue. Around them stand horsetail relatives, stiff and ridged, rising in dense clusters. Fern-like fronds arch overhead, forming a canopy that filters light into a green twilight. The air is thick with humidity, heavy with oxygen, carrying the hiss of insects' wings that have grown to sizes unimaginable today. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than your arms drift slowly through the stillness, their movement unhurried, their presence both beautiful and faintly unsettling. The auditory landscape here is unlike the ocean. Instead of waves and currents, you hear the drip of condensation falling from fronds, the creak of trunks swaying in the wind, the faint rasp of arthropods moving across bark. The stillness is broken, not by predators chasing prey, but by the quiet, constant processes of growth and decay. Fungi knit the soil together, their hidden threads weaving through damp earth, recycling fallen matter, releasing nutrients for the next generation of growth. It is a symphony of patience, each note drawn out over seasons that pass without notice. The forests of this time were engines of transformation. Their trunks pulled vast amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, storing it in wood that would later become coal, reshaping the global climate. Oxygen levels rose to heights the planet has never since seen, making the air rich enough to support insects of monstrous size. Yet the creatures themselves remained humble in variety of scuttling, amphibians lurking in swampy pools, fish still tethered to water. Vertebrates had begun to walk, but their steps were tentative. The giants here were plants, and their reign was quiet but absolute. They reached upward, and in doing so they altered everything. To walk beneath these trunks would feel otherworldly. The light is dim, tinted green. The air presses on your skin with humidity, beads of moisture forming quickly. The ground is spongy with decomposing plant matter, giving under each step as if you are walking on memory itself. Shadows are long, and the space feels enclosed. Not because the trees are close together, but because their sheer height makes the world feel roofed. Sleep comes easily in such an environment. The sound of dripping water and the gentle rustle of fronds would lull any listener into a half-dream state. Yet within that dream lies unease. These forests are alien, their forms familiar yet distorted, their scale immense, their silence profound. A schematic in a geology ledger might describe this age in a line or two. Carboniferous coal swamp deposit, 310 million years. The entry is clinical, the words spare. But within that phrase lies a vast world of towering plants, humid air, and endless patience. The coal seams we mine today are archives of those forests, compressed stories of trunks that once drank carbon and released oxygen, their tissues preserved in black stone. To hold a piece of coal in your hand is to hold the fossilized breath of an ancient forest, to touch the silence of a world without names. The horror here is not violence but inevitability. These forests grew immense, drew down carbon, and changed the atmosphere so drastically that the planet itself responded. Global cooling followed, ice sheets spread, and in time the very abundance of these forests contributed to their decline. Their size made them fragile. Their dependence on swampy ground made them vulnerable. They had rewritten the climate, but the climate in turn rewrote them. To know this is to feel the fragility of grandeur, the way even dominance carries seeds of collapse. What seems eternal is not. Even the tallest trunks fall, and yet their legacy endured. The oxygen they exhaled enriched the world, fueling creatures that tested new possibilities. Amphibians grew larger, some creeping further from water, others lingering in swamps. Insects reached sizes unimaginable today, some dragonflies spreading wings nearly 3 feet wide, millipedes stretching longer than a man is tall. They crawled and flew in the damp air, their bodies thriving in the abundance that forests provided. To close your eyes and imagine them is to feel both awe and unease, the beauty of diversity, the dread of scale. They were not predators of us, for we did not exist, but their size makes them uncanny to us now, reminders that life adapts to whatever stage is set. The tactile sensations of this world are vivid. Imagine running your hand along a trunk patterned with diamond scars, its surface rough, almost reptilian. Imagine crouching to touch the spongy ground, your fingers sinking into layers of haftic matter that smell rich and earthy. Imagine breathing air so thick with oxygen that your chest feels lighter, your breath deeper. These details are soothing in their rhythm, yet they carry quiet dread as well. This is not our forest. It belongs to another time, another rhythm, another set of rules. To wander here is to feel like an intruder in a world that flourished without us. The narration of these forests must be calm, almost reverent. They were not backdrops, they were protagonists. Their rise altered the atmosphere, the climate, the course of life. They prepared the stage for vertebrates to thrive, for reptiles to emerge, for ecosystems to spread onto land with permanence. Without them, the lineage that leads to us would have faltered. Their silence was creative, their stillness powerful. To sleep while hearing their story is to breathe in their legacy, the oxygen they exhaled still present in the air we shared. As the chapter draws to its close, Imagine the camera drifting upward through the canopy, light filtering down in emerald beams, spores drifting like dust motes. The sound of dripping water fades, replaced by a soft breeze that stirs fronds. The narration slows, a whisper that these forests will not last forever. Already the balance is shifting. Already the climate is changing. Already the seeds of decline are sown, yet for now, they stand, vast and nameless, their trunks holding the sky, their breath filling the world. The next act is waiting. Giants will fall, climates will cool, and life will learn once more how to endure. The forest exhales, and the world prepares for what comes after. The silence of the forests could not last forever. Even the tallest trunks, even the richest air, even the abundance of creatures that grew large in the Carboniferous swamps were subject to change. The earth itself shifted beneath them, its climate tightening and loosening like the slow breath of a restless sleeper. Heat gathered, ice returned, and oceans rose and fell. Each fluctuation rewrote the rules of survival. Extinction was not a singular catastrophe in this time, but a drawn-out series of adjustments, slow collapses, and long recoveries. To imagine it is not to picture fire raining from the sky, but to feel the steady pressure of change, unrelenting, patient, and beyond appeal. The forests that once drew carbon down into their trunks had stored too much. The atmosphere cooled. Ice sheets spread across continents, and habitats shifted. Swamps dried in places, shrinking the ground where giant club mosses once anchored themselves. Without their constant pull of carbon, greenhouse gases began to rise again, and climates warmed unevenly. What was once stable became unpredictable. Rain came at the wrong times. Droughts lingered longer than the trees could endure, and species that had flourished for millions of years began to falter. The grandeur of the Carboniferous was undone not by violence but by imbalance. But imagine walking into one of these forests at the end of its reign. The air is still heavy with humidity, but patches of bare ground appear where mats of roots once dominated. The trunks still stand tall, but some are hollow, their cores rotted, their crowns thinning. The undergrowth is patchy, ferns wilting in the heat, pools of water evaporating sooner than before. The sound of insects remains, but fewer of them drone overhead. Dragonflies still drift, but their shadows are lonelier, their numbers diminished. The atmosphere itself feels restless, unstable, as though the very air cannot decide how to hold its balance. To rest in such a place is to feel unease woven into the stillness. Extinction in this era was not immediate. It was stretched across millions of years, long enough that no creature noticed it was happening. Generations came and went, each facing slightly different conditions, each adapting or failing. From our perspective, we see the pattern clearly: losses accumulating, lineages disappearing, diversity thinning. But to those living through it, it was simply life as usual, with challenges that seemed local, temporary, survivable. The horror lies in hindsight, in knowing that entire groups would vanish without fanfare. Their time ended not by one calamity, but by many small ones layered over centuries. In the seas, oxygen dwindled as waters warmed. Warmer water holds less gas, and vast regions became anoxic dead zones where life suffocated. Creatures that once thrived in coastal shallows found their ranges shrinking, their options narrowing. Coral reefs faltered, fish declined, and ecosystems collapsed in quiet succession. On land, amphibians that once basked in swamp abundance faced shrinking pools and harsher climates. Some adapted, growing tougher skins and lungs, more efficient at drawing oxygen from the air. Others retreated, their lineages dwindling until only fragments remained. Reptiles began to rise in their place, their scaly armor a defense against drying, their eggs tough enough to survive away from water. The earth was reshaping its cast, one slow dismissal at a time. The soundscape of decline is muted. Fewer calls, fewer wing beats, fewer movements in the underbrush. The forests that once dripped constantly with moisture are quieter now, their canopies less dense, their shadows less deep. Fungi still work below, breaking down fallen matter, but the abundance above them has lessened. To close your eyes in such a world is to hear absence more than presence, silence filling the spaces once crowded with life. Sleep in this setting is uneasy, not because of threat, but because of emptiness. The lullaby is quieter, the chorus thinner, the world less full. A geological ledger might describe this time clinically: late Carboniferous Permian extinction events, climate fluctuations, habitat reduction, A brief notation, perhaps a table of species lost. Yet behind those words are countless generations that vanished quietly, lives lived fully and ended without legacy. The fossils record them as statistics, but they were communities, ecosystems, balances of energy that had endured for eons. The archive is sparse, but its meaning is heavy. It tells us that stability is fragile, that abundance can collapse without warning, that survival is never promised. The dread that drifts through this chapter is not sudden fear, but recognition of inevitability. Extinction is part of life's rhythm, as constant as reproduction, as unyielding as gravity. To endure is to be temporary, no matter how dominant, no matter how successful. The forests fell, the amphibians declined, the seas emptied, and yet life did not end. It shifted, it adapted, it learned new ways to continue. That continuity is both comforting and chilling. Comforting because it shows resilience, chilling because it shows indifference. Life goes on, but not every form is invited. The tactile impressions of this world are vivid. The ground is drier, cracked in places, dust collecting where swamp once stood. The air is warmer, heavy with carbon, but thinner in moisture. Water pools shrink quickly, their edges caked with mud. The bark of trees feels brittle, less spongy than before, flaking in the heat. The soil beneath still holds threads of fungi, but fewer roots dig deep into it. Touching the land is to touch transition, a surface unsettled, shifting between what it was and what it will become. It is neither fully forest nor fully barren, but something in between. A world caught mid-breath, reptiles crept further into this space, their bodies better suited for dryness. They laid eggs with shells strong enough to resist desiccation, freeing them from the need to return to water. Their lungs worked more efficiently, their scales locked moisture in. They became the new tenants of the land, inheriting a stage where amphibians faltered. With them came a different rhythm of life, one that could endure harsher climates, wider ranges, more demanding conditions. The forest's collapse was their opportunity, and they seized it slowly, generation after generation, until they defined the landscape. From fragility emerged endurance, and from loss emerged renewal. The lesson of this chapter is patience in the face of change. The earth is not cruel, but it is indifferent. Heat rises, seas lose oxygen, forests collapse, species vanish, and yet the story continues. The horror is quiet. There is no one to blame, no single disaster to point to. There is only the inevitability of imbalance, the slow pressure of chemistry and climate rearranging life. To fall asleep with this thought is to accept impermanence, to breathe in the fragility of every moment, to recognize that even abundance carries the seeds of its end. As this chapter closes, imagine the camera of thought drifting above a thinning forest. From above, the canopy looks patchy, green giving way to brown. Pockets of swamp remain, but they are fewer, isolated. Reptiles move across open ground, where amphibians once thrived, their tracks pressed into drying mud. Insects still buzz, but fewer of them, their wings slicing humid air that no longer feels eternal. The scene is quiet, not chaotic, but filled with absence. The narration softens, reminding us that this is not the end of life, only the end of certain chapters. What survives will carry forward, what vanishes will be remembered only in stone. The world has learned to lose, and in learning, it prepares to continue. The forests had thinned, the swamps had shrunk, the great humid age of moss-towered groves had passed. But life, as always, continued. From the shadows of decline, new forms began to rise, carrying with them the quiet promise of futures still unimaginable. Among these were small creatures experimenting with warmth, with coverings that blurred the line between protection and ornament. Feathers appeared first, not as wings but as insulation, filaments sprouting like down across reptilian skin. They trapped heat, held bodies steady against the cooling air, and in time grew into patterns that caught light. At the same time, in other corners of the night, tiny mammals stirred shy, soft-bodied, furred. Their presence was nearly invisible, their bones too fragile to fossilize often, their lives overshadowed by giants. Yet they were there, shadows at the edges, keeping their own rhythms. Together, feathers and fur carried light and shadow into the world, quiet symbols of resilience after loss. Imagine a landscape in the late Triassic and Jurassic. The continents are breaking apart, climates are unstable, and reptiles dominate. The open ground. Dinosaurs rise tall, their bodies massive, their steps echoing across plains. But look closer, in the underbrush, in burrows, in trees, small figures scurry, leap, or glide. Some are covered in primitive feathers, tufts of filament that shimmer faintly in sunlight, not for flight but for warmth and display. Others carry fur, a softer covering that insulates them in the cool of night. These coverings are not armor, not weapons, but shelters worn on the body. They are quiet defenses, subtle advantages, not obvious at first glance but revolutionary over time. The auditory landscape here is layered. The heavy footfalls of large dinosaurs resound in the distance. But closer you hear the rustle of underbrush, the faint scratching of claws on bark, the whisper of wings not yet fully formed but flapping in bursts. At night, the world grows quieter. Still, mammals emerge cautiously, their movements soft, their sounds muted. They nibble, forage, carry their young, all in secrecy. To sleep in such a world would be to rest within the interplay of scale, the thunder of giants in the distance, the murmur of small survivors nearby. The lullaby is one of contrast, massive presence paired with delicate persistence. Feathers began as threads of keratin, simple filaments sprouting from skin. They were not designed for flight, though in time some would stiffen into veins that caught air. At first, they served only to keep bodies warm, to protect eggs, to signal to others with subtle colors and textures. In the fossil record, we find them preserved as shadows on stone, faint imprints that hint at a softness long vanished. A research catalogue might hold a note: specimen with filamentous integument, possible protofeathers, a single phrase, but it points to an evolutionary experiment that reshaped the future. To glimpse such a note is to glimpse a time when light was caught not only by scales but by down, when bodies learned to carry warmth outward, when survival meant softness as much as strength. Fur tells a parallel story. Early mammals, small and secretive, evolved coats of hair to hold in heat, to let them thrive in nocturnal hours when reptiles slept. Their fur allowed them to survive in niches too cold, too dark, or too marginal for others. They were insect eaters, seed gatherers, burrowers, climbers. Each was tiny compared to the giants around them, but their coverings gave them independence from scale. They did not need to be large to endure. They needed only warmth and patience. The shadow of fur was the promise of mammals, a lineage that would bide its time for millions of years, waiting in silence. The beauty of feathers and fur lies in their subtlety. They are not dramatic inventions like jaws or wings, not weapons or defenses meant to intimidate. They are intimate adaptations, close to the skin, quiet shelters. To touch a feather is to feel air captured and released. To touch fur is to feel warmth preserved against cold. These coverings connect the body to the environment in gentle ways. They invite closeness, they soften edges, they turn exposure into comfort. Sleepers in our own time still wrap themselves in blankets, echoes of these ancient adaptations. In our habits, we recall the lesson of creatures who first carried insulation on their bodies. The quiet horror is that softness must hide. Feathers and fur often belonged to the small, the overlooked, the vulnerable. Their survival depended on evasion, on secrecy, on existing in spaces the giants ignored. The fossil record shows us shadows, faint impressions, fragments of jaws and teeth, but rarely the whole. Their absence is as telling as their presence. For millions of years, mammals and feathered creatures lived in the margins, overshadowed, overlooked, yet quietly perfecting the traits that would later define entire eras. Their persistence was fragile, yet it endured, a reminder that survival often belongs not to the loud but to the hidden. Imagine the tactile world of this time. Place your hand against the bark of a tree where a small mammal has scurried upward, the grooves still warm from its touch. Run your fingers across a molted feather left on damp ground, its filaments soft but resilient, bending under pressure, and then returning to form. Scoop up a handful of soil where furred bodies have burrowed, feeling the tunnels beneath your palm. These impressions are gentle, quiet, intimate. They belong not to the grand displays of dominance, but to the quiet rhythms of persistence. To sleep with these sensations is to cradle the softness of survival itself. As dinosaurs grew larger and more elaborate, feathers spread among them. Some lineages used them for display, fans of color and pattern to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Others used them to insulate broods, protecting eggs with blankets of down. Still others experimented with gliding, their feathers catching air, their bodies testing the possibility of flight. None of these were inevitable. Each was a trial, a rehearsal, an exploration. Some failed, others persisted, and slowly the idea of a wing was born. Not all feathered creatures became birds, but enough carried the experiment forward to ensure its future. Mammals, meanwhile, diversified quietly. Some grew membranes to glide between trees, others dug deeper burrows, still others took to water. They remained small, their roles minor in ecosystems dominated by reptiles, but their fur allowed them to keep their own time, to live in cycles of night and cold, to escape the attention of larger predators. They lived in silence, but their silence was endurance. They carried forward a lineage that would eventually rise, though at the time no one would have guessed it. Their presence was like a faint shadow, easy to overlook, impossible to erase. The narration of this chapter is one of patience. Feathers and fur did not arrive as revolutions, but as whispers, adaptations that offered quiet advantages. Over time, those advantages compounded, laying foundations for futures we now take for granted. To sleep while hearing this story is to rest in the comfort of continuity, the reassurance that small, gentle adaptations can carry immense consequences. The giants may rule the stage, but the small write the future in silence. As this chapter draws to its close, imagine the camera of thought drifting across a Jurassic landscape. Dinosaurs stride across plains, their feathers catching light in patterns both fierce and delicate. In the underbrush, mammals scurry, their fur glinting in moonlight, their eyes bright in shadows. The sound is balanced, heavy footsteps fading into distance, soft rustles nearby. The world is vast, but within it, softness endures. The narration slows, offering a gentle hook. Giants may dominate, but the quiet coverings of feather and fur hold secrets of tomorrow. The future waits in shadows, wrapped in warmth, ready to emerge when the stage is cleared. The age of giants was long, but no reign lasts forever. The dinosaurs filled plains, swam in rivers, and ruled the skies with wings of leather and feather. But above them, far beyond their awareness, another script was already being written. The earth had endured shifts before climates warming, seas retreating, forests collapsing, but this ending came from beyond. It arrived as silence in the night sky, then as light, brighter than the sun, then as fire. The asteroid that fell at the end of the Cretaceous did not announce itself. It came without warning, without pattern, and when it struck, the sky itself seemed to fall. Imagine a warm evening on what would one day be called the Yucatan Peninsula. The air is thick, alive with insects, the sound of leaves stirring under the movement of small reptiles. Dinosaurs graze in the distance, massive herbivores pulling fronds into their jaws, their tails swaying like pendulums. Raptors stalk the undergrowth, feathered bodies low, eyes glinting in dim light. Above them, birds dart, calling softly. All seems stable, another day, in an age that has lasted for millions of years. But beyond the stars, a rock many miles wide is already falling. Its speed is beyond comprehension. It crosses the atmosphere in seconds. The world below has no chance to prepare.